In January of 1956, at Purdue University, in his very first class meeting in Principles of Economics, Vernon Smith ran his double auction experiments. He recalls it. I had 22 participants in the class, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Half of the class I made buyers, assigning them private secret values that only each of them knew, and the other half were sellers, and I assigned them costs that each of them knew. What was he out to do? He was looking at the foundations of basic microeconomics. In competitive equilibrium, firms and individuals are seen as price takers, and market prices are perhaps formed by this fictitious Walrasian auctioneer. The model creates quite severe outcomes that couldn't possibly be true, could they? All prices were to be exactly at equilibrium, the law of one price. How could everyone in the market be forced towards this conclusion? Perfect information is assumed for all individuals. There's no way that that was a realistic assumption. Does everyone really know all of their willingness to pay and everyone else's and every firm's willingness to accept? There just simply was no way that all of this could be true. This is similar to the fact that Smith points out that common knowledge is a pervasive assumption in economics. Common knowledge is the idea that I know, that you know, that I know ad infinitum about everything. This underlies all of game theory and much of economic theory in general. This is echoed by Kenneth Arrow when he noted that, quote, even a monopolist has to have full general equilibrium model of the economy in mind in order to optimize. Without all of these assumptions, surely the extreme predictions will not come about. And yet, even to Vernon's initial surprise, that is precisely what happened. Smith used auction rules that are similar to the rules used for trading at the New York Stock Exchange and engaged students who only knew their own personal preferences or willingness to pay, or they only knew their own personal supply schedule or willingness to accept. He ran students through the experiment, and lo and behold, a certain number of transactions would occur, and all of them at close to the same price. After running through the seemingly chaotic mess of give and take by students, Vernon would ask them if they thought there was any kind of analytical model that could predict the outcome of such a situation. Students would feel as if it were impossible, as the various strategies that they enacted, with other people enacting their own strategies. In such an open-ended environment, there just simply was no way you could predict the outcome. Then Vernon would take out an envelope that he had sealed and handed to a student prior to the experiment beginning and open it. Inside the envelope would be a piece of paper with two simple pieces of information on it, a price and a quantity. The price and quantity written down would be an incredibly precise match to the classroom results. Vernon could go on to show that the classroom experience pretty much maximized consumer surplus and producer surplus. In other words, the chaos that they felt they had experienced was actually generating pretty precise, optimized efficiency. Vernon himself felt that the results were freakish the first time through, and perhaps they were just too good to be true. He recalls this, quote, I am still recovering from the shock of the experimental results. The outcome is unbelievably consistent with the competitive price theory, but the result can't be believed, I thought. It must be an accident, so I will take another class and do a new experiment with different supply and demand schedules. And we can see, here is the results with flatter supply and demand schedules. And here, an attempt with very small numbers of buyers and sellers. Even with these different schedules, the prices converged to the competitive equilibrium prices. Deviations diminished with time, and the efficiency, or the sum of the consumer and producer surplus, were incredibly high. Eventually, Vernon was convinced that this actually worked by the play of his undergraduate students. In 1962, Vernon Smith published an experimental study of competitive market behavior in the Journal of Political Economy. This paper explored the results and implications from Smith's original classroom experiments. He laid the foundation for what would eventually become experimental economics and was really launched with his own paper from 1976, Experimental Economics, Induced Value Theory, which was published in the AER. Well, so what? What do we learn from these experiments? In Vernon Smith's experiments and others that followed, like Charlie Plott's, we obviously do not have common knowledge, nor other assumptions of the standard model. The numbers are small, the participants lack knowledge, and price is a variable of choice not given in advance like price taker markets. Vernon states, nobody in that class knew anything about supply and demand. They knew nothing about double auction trading. And yet the experiments worked. They showed functioning markets. Again, to quote Vernon, the result falsified the belief that full information is necessary for markets to achieve high performance. You need to understand that I was brought up to believe that stuff. I had not expected this market to work nearly as effectively as it did. In making us reassess basic economics with his experimental results, Vernon Smith had created a way, as he stated in his 1976 paper, that really moved experimental economics onto the scene. He showed that the study of individuals and groups in the laboratory has important and significant application to the development and verification of theories of the economic system. He showed that our theoretical models had limits, that experiments could help us better understand those limits. He found a way to prove what some good economists had known all along, that there was more to explore about how markets work than our simple models portrayed. His experiments were later rigorously and robustly tested with computer simulations by Goad and Sunder, who he notes in his Nobel address. They summarize their findings of Vernon Smith's double auction setup. Quote, we report market experiments in which human traders are replaced by zero intelligence programs that submit random bids and offers, imposing a budget constraint, i.e. not permitting traders to sell below their costs or buy above their values. This is sufficient to raise the allocative efficiency of the auctions to close to 100%. Allocative efficiency of double auction derives largely from its structure, independent of traders' motivation, intelligence, or learning. Adam Smith's invisible hand may be more powerful than some may have thought. It can generate aggregate rationality, not only from individual rationality, but also from individual irrationality. Well, how do markets work then? That's what Vernon Smith was after. He learned through his experiments that it is not from perfect information or other assumptions that markets work. Similar to Armin Alchian, he learned that the individual is not responsible for the rationality of market outcomes. The individual is not carrying the cognitive burden of markets. We instead rely on the rationality from the institutions themselves. One of his chief contributions throughout his career exploring these ideas was the simple difference between constructivist and ecological rationality. His Nobel lecture was titled Constructivist and Ecological Rationality in Economics, and he later wrote a book reflecting back on these ideas in more detail called Rationality in Economics. Constructivist rationality involves the deliberate use of reason to analyze and prescribe actions judged to be better than alternative feasible actions that might be chosen. The logic of a single mind or organization is working consciously toward an explicit goal. Constructivist rationality treats the understanding of social systems as designed features of the social world. Human reason creates. Our reason is the source of order. We're suited to see this order. Hayek discussed this reality in his book, The Fatal Conceit, and elsewhere as he developed his views on why so many seem to oppose understanding and appreciating the economic insight of spontaneous order. Hayek called our ability to see constructivist order an atavism, a no longer helpful but still existing remnant in our hardwiring that long ago used to serve a purpose. You can think of our love of sweets as a similar atavism. Our love of chocolate once served the purpose of survival, getting caloric intake, but now it still exists as part of our hardwiring, despite it not really being so helpful anymore. Vernon Smith echoes Hayek's feelings in his discussion of constructivist rationality. Quote, "We naturally recognize only one rational order, a constructivist rational order, because it is so firmly a part of the humanness of our reason and our mind's anthropocentric need to think it is in control." Do we see constructivist rationality in economics? Certainly. Market failure theorists reduce the problem of economic organization to only one of constructivist rationality. To the extent that the behavior of market participants diverges from the prescriptions of good system design, markets are then said to fail. We can understand, we can create. Human reason is the source of order. We can reason out and build the order. We can have a constructivist idea of rationality. Ecological rationality claims that the rationality of a particular decision depends on the circumstances in which it takes place. It is not universal. What is rational does not necessarily come from human reason. In 1955, Herbert Simon noted, quote, "We cannot, of course, rule out the possibility that the unconscious is a better decision maker than the conscious." Ecological rationality incorporates the possible intelligence embodied in the rules, the norms, and the institutions of our cultural and biological heritage that are created from human interactions, but not by deliberate human design. As Vernon Smith states, quote, "Ecological rationality refers to the emergent order in the form of the practices, norms, and evolving institutional rules governing action by individuals that are a part of our cultural and biological heritage and are created by these human interactions." Elsewhere, ecological rationality has been defined as acting on the basis of beliefs, habits, and heuristics that function well in a specific environment to attain the agent's goals. Vernon Smith argues that ecological rationality deals with adaptive human decisions and with group processes of discovery in natural social environments. That is, ecological rationality involves both interpersonal interaction and the social environment, including institutions. Vernon Smith's experiments and his concepts of constructivist and ecological rationality create a different view of the work done by behavioral economists. The cognitive limitations and anomalies that behavioral economists have found can help us understand the awe of the market process. Behavioral econ is not of great benefit in that we can simply test the individual rationality, as it is understood within the neoclassical economic model, and then conclude that markets are left with this simple market failure syllogism. Markets work when stringent conditions like hyper-rational individuals are met, and if these conditions are not met, markets will fail. Vernon Smith says this isn't the benefit of behavioral economics. Instead, a Smithian worldview forces us to better understand the market process by making us consider concepts like ecological rationality and how it interacts with different institutional environments to create order. And this all takes place with humans as they really are, full of error. After all, error is obvious. Smith's approach helps us see that the neoclassical model has at least some incredible predictive power, even if its assumptions and definition of rationality are clearly flawed. He pushes us to look deeper.